Hi, boys and girls. It's Miss Matthew, your librarian. Welcome to story time today. Today we're going to talk about procrastinating. If you ever put off your homework and say, I'll do my homework tomorrow, or cleaning your room, yeah, Mom, I'll do it later. Well, that's procrastinating. And we're going to read a cute book called Loudmouth George and the Big Race. And it is about procrastinating. And it's by Nancy Carlson. I think you're going to like this story. It's one of my favorite authors again, Nancy Carlson. And it's a very cute story. Loudmouth George and the Big Race. Look, said Harriet, there's going to be a 2-mile race. I'm going to enter. Me too, said Ralph. How about you, George? Sure, said George. 2 miles will be a breeze for me. I'm going to start training right now, said Harriet. Me too, said Ralph. How about you, George? You guys can train all you like, said George. I'm going to beat you anyway. I'll start my training tomorrow. That night, George went to bed early. He set his alarm clock for 5 o'clock. Professional runners run early in the morning, he said. But when 5 o'clock came, George just couldn't get up. Smart professional runners run later, he mumbled, and he went back to sleep. It was noon when George finally came downstairs. Going running, George? Asked his mother. In the midday sun, said George. Do you want me to get heat stroke? I'll run tonight when it's cooler. After supper, George got interested in a television show. I can start training tomorrow, he said. In the morning, George saw Harriet jog by. She looks terrible, said George. I'd better get out there and show her how it's done. But when George got downstairs, his mother was making pancakes. I'll wait till after breakfast, said George. After breakfast, George was too full to run. I'm going to really train hard after supper, he said. I may even run 10 miles. That night after supper, Uncle Chuck stopped by. Who wants to go to the movies with me, he asked. Oh, I do, said George. On their way, Harriet passed them. Training for the big race, said Uncle Chuck. I sure am, said Harriet. I can run 1.5 miles now. How about you, George? You bet, said George. And I don't even start my real training until tomorrow. The next day it rained. The day after that, George had swimming lessons. The day after that, it was too windy to run. The day after that, it was too cold. The day after that, it was too hot. Finally, the day of the big race arrived. Boy, I'm scared, said Harriet. Not me, said George. A 2-mile race is nothing for me, just a walk in the park. The starting pistol fired, and the racers were off. George ran out fast ahead of everyone. Just like I thought, he said to himself. I'm in first place already. After about 2 blocks, George began to feel a little out of breath. First Harriet passed him. Then Ralph. By the end of the first mile, almost everyone had passed him. George felt really tired. Finally, he made it to the finish line, just in time to see Harriet get her trophy. She took first place. George sat down under a tree to catch his breath. I've been looking all over for you, said Harriet. How'd you do? Not very well, George admitted. My shoes were too tight. Oh, don't feel too bad, George, said Harriet. There's a 3-mile race in 2 weeks. I'm going to start training this afternoon. Want to run with me? This afternoon, said George. Gee, I don't think so, Harriet. I'm kind of tired. I'll start my training tomorrow. So, George was a procrastinator, as we say. Everything was tomorrow and not today. Well, if you can do something today, do it. Don't wait until tomorrow. Just think about all the time you'll have tomorrow if you do everything today. Okay, well, you keep reading, and I'll see you tomorrow.